I can hear something calling. It's calling me every day. If taking a chance is a crime, then I've got hell to pay. I've been walking the streets in my mind, trying to find a new day. Keep on searching until I will find, until I find a new way. I'm gonna say something, I hope you don't mind. It's time to rearrange. I walk round in circles, I'm going nowhere. It's time to make a change.
Hey Tom, how you doing today? Thanks for joining the show. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you.
Yeah, me too, man. Thanks for having me on the show. Really looking forward to this.
So, Tom, let's maybe we'll start with, would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, so I am Tom Foxley. I'm a mental fitness and performance coach, former Royal Marine Commando, and I basically help people perform at the level that they wish they could. They know they have the potential to, and it's kind of a mixture of psychology and philosophy and practical and the physical aspect as well, so nervous system regulation. So everything you need to be mentally fit, so you can increase your capacity in the things that you care about.
No, yeah, Tom, I in seeing some of your social media content and some of the things you're doing, let me just preface this by saying I think what you're doing is much needed. And I can see the benefits of it for people in all walks of life. So I think it's really important work that you're doing also. And again, I was really looking forward to having you on the show. And, even more excited that this is my first podcast for 2025. And I think this is a great way to start, especially with the New Year's goals. I don't like to say resolutions. That's my bit. So I think the whole mental aspect of it is super important. Um, Tom, you mentioned the Royal Marines Commando. I believe it was on your website or somewhere online. I did read about that you transitioned from being a what you described as a skinny, vulnerable, bullied kid with a heart condition uh, to becoming a Royal Marine. So two things I wanted to get into. Would you mind touching on what that was like growing up, being bullied? Uh, Talk a little bit, if you won't mind, about the heart condition and, how did that impact you and who you are today?
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I could talk about myself forever and talk about things at length. I'll try and keep it succinct. So, as a kid, I was a, a lucky balance of physically kind of interested and capable and a little bit academic as well, but I wasn't very socially adept. So I was, yeah, as you said, a little bit skinny, a little bit bullied. It was tough growing up as a kid. I felt quite isolated. I felt alone in a lot of scenarios that I was in. And I struggled, especially around 12 or 13, with trying to fit in. And around that time, I started getting bullied. And that was physical, emotional. It was intense. It was on the bus on the way to school. It was at school in school breaks. It was on the way home. And that was very, very tough, as I think most people could imagine. But at the same time, I was cycling back from school one day and my heart just started, well, first of all, it stopped beating. And I was like, this is, I'm no doctor, but I can tell this ain't great. And then it just went into like hyperdrive, like 220, 230 beats per minute. Your maximum heartbeat's going to be like 220 minus your age. So that was going pretty crazy, and I kind of losing consciousness and consciousness fading in from the outside. It's like one of those movie scenes where the blackness fades in from the outside. So that was going on, lay down the side of the road. And at that point, I genuinely thought I was dying. I genuinely thought this was it. And for a 13-year-old or 14-year-old, however old I was, that was terrifying. And then my heart just snapped back in. There's this big like build up of tension and a bang, like I was back in. There's a full on gasp of breath and back to reality. what I didn't know is that was the first time of maybe thousands that it's happened in my life. Now, I was temporarily diagnosed at that point with sudden death syndrome, which is the least positive diagnosis that I think a doctor can offer a young boy and his mother. I was like, I think your son's got sudden death syndrome. And I can remember the look on my mum's face. From there, I went through myriad tests and did the whole running on treadmills with electrodes strapped all over you, seeing a live beating reflection of your heart on a screen. And they ruled out anything physiological, which as one hand was quite freeing, but on the other hand, it's scary because it's like, right, you should be fine. Go back to training, go back to sport, go back to cricket and football and everything else you played. And that's terrifying because who knows whether it's going to happen again. And it does happen. It did happen again plenty of times. So the reason why that's interesting to me is because there's nothing physiological there. Every valve was in the right place. The heart was the right size. Like I was healthy in all the ways you can imagine. It was entirely psychological. It was the stress. It was the anxiety, the fear. And what we know now, and this is probably what kicked off my interest in doing what I do, especially the physiological side, was the mind-body connection is one thing. It's not like you have this consciousness that's in control of your body the whole time. We hear things like the brain, the gut. We have these kind of this idea of what the vagus nerve does, but it's just one thing, that connection from the brain to the body and the body to the brain. We know that the vagus nerve has more input going to the brain rather than the brain down. There's so many things within this, and that's what interested me in that kind of world, that I can look back and kind of piece that together. And that led me to the Royal Marines eventually, because I kind of thought, hey, you know what? Screw this. Like, I'm going to do something about this. I was lucky enough to get introduced to a book called Bounce, which introduced the 10,000 hour rule, and also this guy called Bear. And Bear's a Royal Marines Commando. He later went on to work in the Special Forces, and he was this gigantic man, Royal Marines Commando, and he kind of introduced me to the concept of the core, and that was what took me into the Royal Marines eventually. Those two things working side by side, and they kind of created the belief change of, I couldn't do that, to why couldn't I do that? And that was a real tipping point in my life.
Wow. I mean, hearing you, I didn't know when you were talking about the heart condition, it was scary as hell just listening to it, because I can't even imagine at that age that happening. And then, as you kind of finished up, and it was more of a mental stress induced thing. It's kind of scary to think about that, people think about stress, or for kids that are bullied, but to think about that it could cause something like that it's really scary. And I hope eye-opening when people hear that. So you're in the you're a Royal Marines Commando, you're in the Royal Marines. I just want to touch a little bit on, you start to talk about it a little bit, but how, that training, that work, all that you've done throughout your career in the Royal Marines, how does that not only influence what you do today, but how does it start to help you help others who maybe aren't from that world, that military background?
I think the main thing that I see, having done that, and that everyone else who has done military training, especially that upper tier of military service, and where people are really physically and emotionally pushed, is that you don't know just how much more you've got to give. And I think what makes me a good coach, but also allows me to tap into it myself, is I always know that we're barely scratching the surface of what we have to give. And a great example of that was when I was actually trying out to get into the Royal Marines, and you go through a few basic fitness tests to get in, psychological testing, all that kind of stuff. And then you eventually go down, or when I did it, it was called the PRMC, the Potential Royal Marines course. And it's basically a 3-day thrashing. You do some pull-ups and sit-ups on the first day, and they make you a bit tired here and there. And it's like, looking back at it, it's not actually so difficult. But the last day, you do a bottom field test, which is basically they throw you around an assault course and get you wet and muddy, and you crawl and drag everyone and just destroy your legs. And then you go on to something called the endurance course. A part of that is also the final test that you do as a Royal Marines Commando to get your green beret. However, what they do at that point is there's hills everywhere. It's horrendously muddy. There's water everywhere, and you're just dragging people up and down these hills. They absolutely thrash you, and then you go on a run back to camp. Anyway, I was at this point where I'd never physically done anything that tough before. I'd worked pretty hard. I'd run quite a lot from as a kid and kind of growing up after the palpitations and the heart condition. And I'd gone from a point where I couldn't do a single pull up and a single press up, and I couldn't run half a mile without stopping, to being at this place where I was able to do this. And I was just pushing myself so hard, and I'd done these endless drags, and I was doing this backward carry where you loop your arms between between the arms and the torso of the bloke you're dragging, and you're leaning backwards and you're pulling him backwards up a hill. And I was really driving, my legs were screaming. It was very difficult. And I thought, I'm done. I'm absolutely done this, and I'm going to quit. And I was imagining going back to my then girlfriend, now wife, and I was imagining telling the few friends that I had at that time, my family and the people that I knew, that, hey, I couldn't hack it. And I had this in my mind, and I was kind of conceptualizing this failure, and I put the bloke down, I finished that carry, went up to the corporal, and stupidly I was about to tap on the shoulder, which is a big no-go when you're not even a recruit yet. But I was about to tap him on the shoulder and get his attention, and the whistle blew for the end of the evolution, or the PTI signal the end of the evolution, and I passed that phase. And I was thinking, I never reflected on it for years. But when I did, I was like, I was about to give up then. I was about to wrap. I was about to say, this is it. But I had way more in the tank. I had the run back. I had a little bit more. And I think I see that when people are putting in the limitations of, oh, I don't think I can do this. Or I think that maybe my business is going to fail. Or I'm not sure whether I can ever get a handle on my anger, or I'm not sure I can be the husband that I want to be for my wife, or I'm not sure I can take the time off for work that I really need to without feeling that guilt. The thing that always comes to mind is, well, let's try it. Let's just go 5% past this. And psychologically, what you're doing is exposure therapy. You push a little bit more, you go into the unknown, you go outside of the comfort zone, and then you come back to safety, and you just do that over and over. And people have no idea how far that goes. There's this old, Jordan Peterson talks about it quite a lot. He talks about this Jewish kind of saying about, what does an all-knowing, all-seeing, ever-present God lack? And it's a good question. What does that God lack? And the answer is limits. And that's what makes us human. But also, that's the exciting thing, because your limits expand, your limits grow depending on which direction you want to take them.
Man, that was, hearing you, I've had some guys on who have been in special forces, even over here, some of the Navy SEALs, and they talk about Hell Week. And, I think when I speak to, guys that have been through it's pretty similar how we, especially folks that aren't in the military, I don't think we realize that a lot of these limits we set on and are brought on by ourselves. And even Tom, for me now, I have my own issues as far as fitness and my weight and stuff like that. I've overcome it now, but it's funny because, when you said it about the exposure therapy, I never really put a name to it, but even for me now, I try at least every couple weeks, I try to just do some type of workout that is just, most people say stupid, my daughter turned 21. So I'm like, you know what, today I'm going to do 2,100 kettlebell swings with a 50-pound kettlebell, just out in the, 100-degree heat on my deck, just because, right? But it was more like, people say, why do you do it? I think my answer always is, sometimes I just need that mental mind right, to get me sorted. But no, I think you really, really explained that well, and I think it's going to mean a lot when people hear it. And it leads me into this next thing, because something I saw on your website that just, I love this. At the end of the day, what binds us together, it's pretty cool. I believe this, but you say about do more cool shit and build a meaningful life without unnecessary limitation holding us back. I just love that whole concept. And I wanted to ask, when you excuse me, when you look back and when you talk to people now, What's the philosophy like to really push people to not just overcome the limits, Tom, but how do you help people maybe not set limits so that they can really enjoy doing cool shit?
Okay, so there's a lot to that. We can pick that apart in lots of different ways. The first thing I try and do when I work with people is understand what's meaningful to them. And you have your inherent meaningful properties, and so do I. So I find sticking some skis on my feet, climbing up a peak in the Karakoram, which is an aspect of the Himalayas essentially, and skiing down some 6,000 meter mountains, I find that very meaningful. Most people would think, I've flown into Pakistan, what the hell am I doing? And I thought that too, but it's so meaningful to me that I want to do it. If I look to someone in my group at the moment who I'm coaching, golf, super meaningful to him. And like that's his influence. And then you look at other people, it's family, you look at other people, it's guitar and music. For other people, it's nature. Like there's something in your life that you find beautiful and meaningful, and that no matter whether you were paid to do it or not paid to do it, you'd make the time to do it. If you had complete freedom, that's what you'd be doing. You'd be engaged in that thing. And what I'm trying to do is essentially go say, what is meaningful to you? Because when we do that, it exposes a path. When we put it into words, when we really articulate it, it shows us boundaries, and it shows us a path, and it shows us inherently what we should be doing with our lives. Like one of the most meaningful things to me is psychological and personal development. Like, what do we need to do to grow? And that eliminates 99.999% of options to me. And therefore that forces us down. It just like with the magnifying glass in the sun, it concentrates your focus to move forward. And then in doing that, that's when you hit your limitations, because you bounce up against this edge, you struggle to do something. And maybe there's a skill gap, probably there's a skill gap. And maybe there's a psychological and personal development opportunity for you. And that's where we look as well. And we're constantly walking this path of attainment versus actualization. You've got one foot on each side of that, and you can only get so far in attainment before you have to psychologically develop, and you only get so far in the actualization side before it's worth just moving up in terms of the attainment too. So when I'm looking at helping people, it's like, what's meaningful to you? Let's set some goals. Let's aim at something, because aiming makes your life precise. And then let's get moving towards it. And when you move towards it, that's when you find the limitations.
So when I hear that, I think about just this life in general, how busy everybody seems to be. And one of the things I think that you really talk about a lot is, about freedom seeking business owners, right? So how do you really help clients discover that freedom to really be able to do something that's truly meaningful to them?
I'm going to try and talk about a client that I've got at the moment, because actually it's an amalgamation of 3 different people that I'm working with. Interestingly, they all own gyms. They are all pushing down this lens of like, I want to create a chain of gyms, or like an individual CrossFit coaching gym that does very well. And they know they're in it to create freedom. But also, they're at different stages in this, but they've become so trapped by this story of, I should be doing more. If I'm resting, that's a problem for me. And so here we see, all right, like I shouldn't be resting. I feel guilty if I do this. Like, what's my wife going to think of me? What's my partner going to think of me? Or my clients or my team going to think of me if they see me taking time off? And they've been captured by the story of more is better, or that I should always be busy. But there's a point where more hustle and grind doesn't create more freedom. You can't do more and get more. Just like in training, sure, there's once every 2 weeks or so, it's great to absolutely smash yourself. But if you did that day in, day out, doing more wouldn't make you better. And what we're essentially looking at here is the fight between more and better. And in a world and in a zeitgeist and a worldview that is driven by scarcity, so there isn't enough, I need to take all I can get. Pursuing better is a rebellious act. Saying, I want my life to be better, not to have more clients, more money, more revenue, more back end offers, more team, like more. It's more house, more car, more friends. But one of the biggest things that I stop people in their tracks and say, you're talking about more, let's talk about better. And when you talk about better, that means quality. It means in not even enjoyment. It means doing things that you find meaningful in day out. And what we have to do essentially, how do I create freedom to help them do that? It's, well, let's identify what quality is for you. Let's identify what better is. And then think about, okay, well, that looks like working a maximum of X number of hours per day. What are you going to do in that time that means you've got some downtime? Like, what are you going to do in that downtime? You're going to go to the driving range. You're going to take your partner out for dinner. Are you going to spend some time with your kids? Are you going to train? Are you going to do that? Sit there and do sweet FA? Like, what's the thing you're going to do with that time? And over time, that is difficult to begin with. They get bombarded with negative emotion, but with a bit of support and the accountability and the direction, it really helps them move into that freedom. And freedom essentially means like geographical, means personal freedom. So the choice you make means time and financial as well. And we conceptualize growth around those things.
So listening to you say that, do you think in your experience with your clients in general, do you think that freedom, I mean, freedom is a kind of a all-encompassing word, in my opinion. Do you think freedom is more, do you think people define their own version of freedom? And then if so, how do you really get them to shift that mindset to really be like, okay, now this is your definition of freedom. Now I got to get your mindset focused on achieving that freedom.
Yeah, so it comes down to small intentional actions. So someone might have an idea of freedom that's just they need more financial freedom. They need to earn more. Okay, so what are the inputs that create the output? Let's do some more of those. Someone might have an idea of like geographical freedom. I want to be free, like from being at a certain place at a certain time on someone else's order. So how do we do that? What are the sets and reps? And I'm really interested by the idea of you want a certain output. You can only put so much input in. Like if you're making a coffee, you'd think, okay, I want the output of a great coffee. I can only put so much water through. Like, so now I can play around with the quality of the input, the quality of the coffee that I put in. How finely is it ground? What type of roast is it? What type of beans are they? Like, how am I preparing it? Like, and that creates a better quality output. And it's the same thing with kind of the way we act and the way we build our lives, as far as I can tell so far anyway. And it seems like, can you improve the quality of the input? And that ultimately is your thoughts, and ultimately is the mindset you carry around with you.
Well, I can tell you this, relating it to coffee is probably going to influence a lot of people because hell, who doesn't enjoy coffee, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. I was thinking about it this morning when I was thinking about coming on this, and I was making myself a little flat white. I was thinking about, oh, that's a great little metaphor, because you've got so much water coming through. You can improve the quality of the water. You've got the output you're trying to create, and it's just the extraction process. Like, what is the essence that you're extracting from that, and what's the resistance that you meet? You know, that puck in an espresso machine forms resistance, and that's what our stories do. They channel it. We need that. We need it to do something, but it has to be flavored in some way. And that's our personal story. And some of it is psychological makeup. Some of it's your big five personality score. And a lot of it is your conditioning too. Like, what have you had as a kid? And some of it is just what makes you, your authenticity, your individual, genuine intellectual curiosity. And when you get that puck prepared properly, that creates the flavor of coffee or the intensity that you love and that you want.
so that leads me to this, and this is off. I didn't really have this as a question, but what you just said there, now I have to ask you because I'm curious. Um, in what you do, because I find myself doing this too. Do you find yourself in what seems to be little mundane tasks in life, or things that you just do over and over again without thinking. Do you find yourself a lot of times really translating that into a metaphor or into a story or something that you think you can really help a client with?
Yes, but that's been something I've had to work at, because my genuine intellectual curiosity is figuring out frameworks and systems and the why behind things. And I'm one of those people who skips through all the story bits of a nonfiction book because, like, I want the essence of it. I want the granular details. So I've had to think, like, when I'm playing guitar, I'm like, okay, there's only so much guitar that I can play where I'm just patterning in poor movement. Now, what can I do to improve the quality of the input? And it's like, oh, that's a thing. Or like walking the dog, or like, actually, here's a great little example that touched on the physiological side, which is what we haven't touched on as much yet. There's this beautiful moment that I try and have every single day. I've got a newborn daughter. She's 7 weeks old.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's mental. It's crazy, as I'm sure you remember. I've noticed this thing. Firstly, my wife and I, whether we're using our left hand or our right hand, put her heart over our heart. And I was reading in a study recently that like that co-regulates our nervous system. But then I also do this thing where once a day I put on some music, usually that my wife doesn't like because it's country and she's not particularly into country. Put her over my chest, not my wife, my daughter, and I dance with her. And I sing to her, and I have these things, daddy-daughter dances, which is really cheesy, but I absolutely adore it. And I notice her heart rate comes down, her breathing rate calms down, she almost always settles. And it's this beautiful moment of connection, and it makes me feel emotional. It definitely makes my wife feel emotional. Maybe she's crying just because she hates the music, but she's there's a few tears in her eyes as well. I think it's the sentimentality of it. And it's really psychologically pleasing, but physiologically too. What's happening is we're co-regulating nervous systems between each other, and like my breath and rate of breath is influencing hers, and the state of me is influencing the state of her, and that makes her feel safe, and that safety in her makes me feel safe. And it just touches on the fact that we are physiological beings as well as psychological and intellectual and philosophical. So if we ground ourselves in this physiological world, this connection, in this getting, you said it, yeah, before we started recording, getting outside and seeing some sunlight when it's around and moving, that has an outsized impact on the quality of our inputs. So yeah, in answer to your question, yeah, I try and see those stories. I try and see those metaphors.
Well, again, congratulations and thanks for sharing that story. That was, I really enjoyed. I have three daughters and one son, but yeah, thinking back, my oldest is in her 30s now, and my youngest just turned 18. My wife and I, it was our first truly adult Christmas this year, and I got to be honest, I'm not sure how I felt about the whole thing, but it's definitely enjoy it. It goes really, really quick, as I'm sure people have told you. But yeah, that was a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
You start to touch on the physical during that a little bit, and I think it ties into this next section I wanted to get into is the whole not just physical aspect, but adventure seeking. How does adventure really, what does it mean to you? And how do you help others think of adventure as more than just maybe climbing up a mountain, skiing down a mountain? How important is it that we experience adventure, Tom?
Essential. What is mapped onto us is psychologically, and it seems like physically too, is the hero's journey. Every film you've ever seen that's resonated with you is the hero's journey. Like Joseph Campbell put it together. Carl Jung talked about it in certain ways too. The foundations of being human is kind of contained within a story, and the story that resonates with you is you are the hero. And for some people, that might be being the best mother you could possibly be. That's the hero for you. For me, it's something around freedom. There's there's mountaineering in there. There's being a father. There's physiological and psychological mastery. There's something about being the best I possibly can be that seems to resonate with other people. And what we're really trying to get at is, what does it mean for you to live adventurously? And I like to go out and do things like the ski touring trip in Pakistan that I did last year, because it reminds me of like, what is adventure. And there's a different frame. There's a different, like when the plane lifted off, not even before a touchdown in even Dubai halfway, but like when the plane took off and I was even packing my gear, I was like, this is adventure. And it switches on this circuitry in your brain of like, I'm seeing things differently. I'm finding meaning in small things. I'm connecting dots that I hadn't connected before. Like this idea of experiential density came to mind. Like when you're on an adventure, so much happens in such a short, compressed amount of time. The density of the experience is so compressed. It's so intense. And you're like, oh, only a day has been, I've done 5,000 things. And that's because not that more necessarily is happening, but you're doing something different and you're engaged in the moment. So I think it's important to do those big adventures because they remind you to live adventurously in the day to day. And really, what you're trying to ask yourself over and over again is A, what's important now? And B, what would the hero of my own life do? If I was a superhero and it was being filmed, what would the version of me, the best version of me that I can conceptualize, do right now? And it might be last night, for example, instead of getting frustrated with my crying daughter and her colic, it'd be to soothe her. It'd be to take a breath myself, master myself, and then come back to her. And like same for looking after my wife. It would be to push an extra couple of hours that I did last night at work and to also cook dinner. Whereas the easy option would have been to go, hey, screw it, I'll get to work tomorrow. Like that's what the hero of my life would do. And so I think that's mapped into us. And your version, Charles, of the hero's journey looks so different to mine. But that's what makes us human. That's the interesting thing. And that path of self-discovery is, I think, what makes life interesting.
Tom, that was actually really fantastic because I don't think people, and last year I had a few people on that we got into the hero's journey, but um, I personally, I've never thought of it in the way you just actually talked about it. And I really think it's an interesting way to look at it. Like, I don't think we think about as being fathers, husbands, employees or the boss or a manager, right? I don't think we think about it of how can we be the hero in this story, right? To us, I think it's just we're going through, our day to day, so to speak. But that's really, really something, and I personally, I'm going to take that with me away from this podcast. And I really, really, I mean this, I appreciate that because it's definitely a different way of looking at things. And, I've been doing a lot now besides the podcast with kids' books and stories and how important it is for them to understand about being a hero. And, it was something that really, really resonated with me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Sorry, I'm going to jump in real
Yeah, go ahead.
quick because I think there's a difference between people who live adventurously and people who don't, or who turn down the hero's journey. And that's an acceptance and a willingness to look at danger. It's necessary to have an interesting hero's journey, to have an aspect of danger in your life, whether that's failure, whether it's physiological danger. Sebastian Junger said that danger sharpens the contours of reality. And that is beautiful. And I think we need danger in our lives. We need that edge. We need the risk. When I was navigating crevasses in Pakistan, or whether I'm thinking about this way I soothe my daughter now has an impact on the rest of her life, or whether I'm thinking about I'm setting up a business with the very real prospect of failure, that has danger associated with it. But I think we're so captivated by the idea of safety and removing risk and softening edges that it does the opposite of what Junger was talking about. It makes edges ambiguous. The contours of reality become murky and less engaging. Whereas if there's sharp contours, we know how to engage, we know how to see, we know how to act. And that's way more interesting as a human being.
Yeah, that definitely, it's a great point you bring up. I think I heard somebody say before about don't waste your blade. As far as sharpening the edge, don't go through life and waste your blade. Make sure that you are actually really focused on things like danger, excitement, obviously within reason. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. As far as the physical, this was something that I think ties to this, but and you mentioned it earlier about if we're not, if we're smashing ourselves and not really taking care of ourselves and always constantly grinding. Um, how important everything that you've talked about, how important is making sure that we're physically capable? And I think the way you said it and something I read was about having the capacity to be leaned on, right? So how do you balance that, living that fulfilling life, but being able to be dependable for others?
So I think that physiologically that forms the foundation of that, and I think you have to I was listening to Dr. Becky, I can't remember her surname. She was on Tim Ferriss's podcast and she was talking about being a sturdy leader, and I think that actually comes about in all aspects. I basically coach people to do three different things. They generate resilience, they generate character, and they develop clarity. And when those are robust and sturdy, and they have this ability to provide a foundation that enables us to grow. So really we're looking at, like, when we're looking at growth, we're looking at those three things. So enhance your clarity. Can you see better? Can you articulate the world better? Can you build resilience? So your ability to positively adapt to stress. And that's where the physiological things comes in. So if I'm physiologically weak, if I can't press much overhead, I'm going to struggle physiologically, but also in terms of my heart rate variability. If any amount of stress knocks me off an idea of resonance or an optimal level of HRV for me, then I'm going to struggle. And what didn't I do? Character. If I haven't developed my character, if my character has no capacity for growth because I can't conceptualize frameworks, or I can't move towards a better version of me, or the Übermensch, as Nietzsche calls it, then I have no capacity to grow. So that's what we're really looking at, those three elements.
And Tom, I think how do you when you speak with your clients and in your experience, and I think this time of year especially, do you find that more people seem to, put a lot of the goals and things they think that they're going to achieve, right? That they relate it totally to the physical, like whether it's weight loss or getting in shape, right? Does it become a little more difficult for someone like you, right? Are people looking for that mental aspect of it, or do you find that you experience people are looking more for the whole physical side of it?
I think it's everything. I break down life into health, wealth, love, and happiness. Those four areas. So physiological, the kind of wealth side of things, like whether that's career or personal finances or assets or whatever. Love, relationships with everyone, including yourself, and then happiness, like what you do that makes you you. And when I work with people, some people want the personal growth, but the biggest challenge that I have in my business in terms of like how to actually show people and demonstrate what growth happens, you can't quantify very easily. Like, sure, you can do like kind of subjective measures, but it doesn't really work that well. But you can say, this is what I've achieved. And in order to, again, improve the quality of the output and what you attain, you must increase your capacity to handle challenge. With each step up the rung of life, it requires a better version of you to be displayed. So what I'm trying to do is increase that capacity on, like, so you want to reach that next rung, let's push you up there and let's increase your capacity so that becomes your baseline, and then that becomes the area that you operate in. So they'll look for those four different areas, and what I'm thinking of is, how do we support that? How do we allow that to grow?
And as far as your business goes, what do you have planned for 2025? Anything on the horizon? Anything that people should really, anything new coming out, or in general, how would people be able to reach you and work with you?
Yeah, so I have a few things in the pipeline. I run the Mental Fitness Academy, and that's essentially for business owners who want to move to their next level of performance. That's usually the best way of people working with me. I also work one-to-one with people. It's almost prohibitively expensive for people, just because I prefer having a small number of those clients. It works best. I can't handle more than 4 of those clients at once. So the Mental Fitness Academy is usually best for people. I'm also going to be running some short courses, because I think that really engages you. If you have, like, I'm really kind of floating the idea around at the moment, but I think the idea of, I'm going to work on this for 8 to 12 weeks, really focus on it. I'm going to learn as much as I can. That intensity, almost like going to a training camp, really forces your mind, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get laser focused on this. Whereas sometimes I think something like the academy, like, people think of it and go, well, that's could be endless. When's the project complete? But if I can say, well, there's this unique little thing, this small 12-week period or 8-week period where we can work together. But best way to find me is, I'm on Instagram more than I am LinkedIn, although I am sometimes on LinkedIn too. Just search my name, Tom Foxley, which is Foxley, or you can go to my website, tomfoxley.me. I also have what I call like a daily mental shot of espresso, which is my podcast, Spiritual Espresso, someone called it, and I like that. It's my daily, it's a podcast called The Freedom Project, and I've got a series on there called The Mental Edge, and it's like 3 to 5 minutes every single day. It gets released at 5 a.m. our time, which is like, here you go. This is something to make your day count, to give you the mental edge.
Yeah, I saw that you had that. I was going to ask you about that. I've listened to, I think I listened to one last night. And I think that's such a fantastic idea. These smaller, short bursts of these snippets. I think people, especially nowadays with the attention span, I think that's a really, really good way to do it. Well, Tom, honestly, this is probably where I would usually end the podcast, but your story about your daughter really, really got to me as a father, and I want to ask you something, and it's this. We talked a lot about adventure, danger. Now you have this little adorable daughter. How does it change who you are and the way you approach life?
Man, I'm only 7 weeks in, so there is that. But when I was on my way out to Pakistan, we knew that we were pregnant and we're expecting around November, and this was in May that I headed out there. Yeah, late April, early May. No, early May that I headed out there. So I knew that we're going to have this baby soon, and it added so much more care and intentionality to how I acted and how I thought. So I think in some ways, I'm not sure how viable going to Pakistan again is, although we're thinking about an 8,000 meter ski at some point. But that's a kind of different kind of project. But it shifted things a bit. I think essentially I'm still who I am, but there's obviously just an extra level of responsibility. But that responsibility is interesting. I thought it detract from what I'm doing, but it's intensified the good parts and it's made me more intentional. So maybe that's it. Maybe having Skylar has made me more intentional with my efforts. It's given me an extra gear, actually, that extra responsibility.
Fantastic. I wish you and your wife all the best with your daughter. I hope that you guys enjoy it. And years from now, remember I said this to you, the most dangerous thing you'll ever do is raise a teenage girl. Good luck. Good luck. Listen, Tom, it's been fascinating having you on. I really, really appreciate it. Been great getting to chat and getting to know you a bit. And I think people are going to really take a lot out of this. So really glad to be able to bring this to people. Looking forward to them hearing what you have to say, and hopefully they'll look to connect with you even more. That would be great. So Tom, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, dude. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and everybody, welcome to 2025. Hope everybody's goals are off to a great start, and looking forward to bringing you many more episodes this year, like this one with Tom Foxley. So thanks, everyone. Take care. Tom, take care. Talk soon.
This has been the Bare Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.